I think a lot of leaders are data driven, but I'm curious about for you specifically, because this is what I think. Ultimately, I think what separates the great from the good is judgment, right? Which is like, hey, the data says this, right? So sometimes it's significantly different. So for example, like you say, hey, let's go option A and let's go option B. What if option A and option B have similar results? How do you make judgments when there's not definitive data that says this is absolutely the right answer? How do you approach your judgment tree? Like,
I think a lot of tech leaders think they perceive themselves as being data driven, but I think that the way that we do things is very different in the sense that it's really very similar to the way that we did science, in the sense that you're really hypothesis driven first. And then you create something that's very simple out of that hypothesis as an experiment. You look at the data that comes out of that experiment. And just like in science, the null hypothesis is that things are not going to work out, right? And you have to prove the opposite of that when you're doing an experiment. And we really never make a decision on whether to do something or not do something. We really make a decision on whether to scale it or not, because when we do these experiments, we don't do them at scale. We do them on a very small number of users or customers or whatever, and that really limits the amount of investment that we create before we actually have to make a decision. And the decision to scale it or not to scale it then comes from what is the return on investment on scaling that, right? So for example, like you asked, how do you make the decision if there's no difference? If there's no difference and it doesn't cost us anything and we think that strategically that's something that we want to move forward with, then we'll do it. If there's no difference and it costs us a lot in order to scale something, then we're not going to do it, because the uncertainty in the return outweighs the investment that we would have to do in order to scale something.
When you're building the future, there's not always data to support what you're about to build. You know what I mean? So like, there's just not. And that's why most innovations come from outside. You mentioned earlier in the conversation, most innovations actually come outside of the realm of expertise, because it takes someone who has no clue to like sometimes make that call. And so I think that's really smart to say like, hey, I still have a criteria, even if I don't have a result that I want. Like I thought experiment A and experiment B was significant on telling me the difference between the two. I still think having there has to be a way, a method to make that judgment. So I appreciate you sharing that with us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, I think that's what makes it fun, is that continuous improvement on things. And that's the other thing that I think that is very important, is that Kaizen only works when you do these things using very small steps, right? And I think that that's what makes us different as well, is because when you have a vision, a lot of people and a lot of entrepreneurs think that they have to build their full vision. And then, and a lot of entrepreneurs that come to me and they ask me for investment or something, or advice even, they're like, well, I'm going to build out this big thing. And then I'm like, well, okay, so what are you going to do with it afterwards? And I'm like, well, it's a big thing that's going to be that's going to be worth millions or billions of dollars. And it's just because it's going to be so much better. And I think that what people lose sight of is your first product is never going to be good enough, right? So, and what people should focus on is, I think this is, now banal, right? Like I think a lot of people have been written about, a lot of things have been written about it, from agile to, whatever, is that you want to get to an MVP. And that's when, as fast as possible, and that's when the real work starts, right? So the real work starts when you actually start improving on that MVP. And the smaller and the simpler that MVP is, the easier it's going to be for you to continuously improve on it. And the faster you're going to get to that, exponential improvement part of the cycle. And I think that's really, really important for people to understand, is that you really want to focus on the latter part of that, right? So the improvement part of that, not the building of the first, idea part of it, because the first idea is going to be wrong.
Well, you're in the right field with that mentality, man. Software, I joke with people all the time. So the problem with software is it's never done. Like it's never good enough. Like just kind of like how you said your parents on your grades, right? It's true. Like whatever you have today is not good enough. Like there's someone else building something better. And the only industry I can think of where you can make something that's good enough maybe is food. Like there's certain food products, they haven't changed their recipe for like decades. But outside of that, most technology, software especially, like you're never going to be done. So for anyone out there listening that says, hey, I want to be an entrepreneur, I want to build something, I think you got to take Borya's advice, which is like, whatever you think you're going to build, know that when you get there, it's not good enough. Like that's right. What's crazy.
And so logically, it's the process of improvement, which is more important than the actual idea of what you're going to build. And I think that a lot of people don't understand that. So think about the great companies in the world, the great technology companies, Microsoft, for example. Microsoft in the 1970s, right, with DOS, has nothing to do with Microsoft in 2022, right? It's a completely different company. It has completely different products. So it's not really the idea that made them successful. It must be something else that made them successful. And I posit that what made them successful is the process of improvement of that idea. And that's what makes companies great. It's when they lose that ability to consistently improve on the products that they created, that's when they start dying. And I think you said it right, is that everything is changing and the speed of that change is increasing with time.
Hey, thanks for watching. This segment is brought to us by Salesforce Platform. Visit salesforce.com/newsletter to discover timely insights and useful tips tailored to your role. Subscribe to this channel and get more great IT and tech interviews with top industry leaders.